Live, it's the Inside Scoop, Virginia. All the news Virginians want to know. Here's your host, political insider George Burke.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia. I'm your host, George Burke. My guest tonight is Jerry Connolly, chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors and Democratic candidate for Congress in the 11th District. I think Jerry's pretty well known to our viewers, but just a little bit of background. I'm going to be very brief and let him to fill in more if he feels it's necessary. Jerry got a BA in literature and a master's in public administration from Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government. He worked for 10 years on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. For the last 14 years, he's been on the Board of Supervisors here in Fairfax County, the last 5 as chair of that board. He's married to Catherine Smith, better known as Smitty, and he has one daughter, Caitlin, who is about to go to college. And welcome, Jerry. Good to have you today.
Thank you, George. Great to be back.
I want to say a couple of things before we start here. Jerry's opponent, Republican Keith Phimian, has been invited on several occasions to be on this show. The Phimian campaign backed out of a debate that we were supposed to have between Jerry Connolly and Phimian. Not that you haven't had a bunch. He was invited on this show by myself. He was invited up on this show by the producers, and he repeatedly chose not to appear. I'm not surprised, given some of his performances that I have seen in some debates, but I want to make it clear that he has been invited on this show. Anyway, let's get right into it. You've got a lot of experience on the Fairfax board, but your experience goes back in Fairfax County a lot longer than that. One of the things that I firmly believe is that those we send to Congress should be grounded locally, should have experience within the community, not only a network of people that they draw on, but experience in working on the civic level and the government level. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about how you got into this game, so to speak?
I agree with you completely. I mean, I think that most of us in Northern Virginia who move up in political life first started out as active civic activists, and certainly that was true in my case. Tip O'Neill talked about all politics being local. I was working in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. During the day I was working on legislation and foreign policy issues and meeting heads of state as they'd come to meet with senators at the committee. But at night I was involved in my community, and eventually I became the president of my civic association. And that was the year we discovered oil.
And that was in Mantua.
In Mantua.
Yeah.
And I went from an average civic association meeting of maybe 65 people to talk about gypsy moth spraying to an average of 900 people after we discovered oil, because we were worried, and I had to manage a situation where what were the health consequences of exposure to that underground plume of petroleum products? What about pregnant women? What about the unborn fetuses? What about senior citizens who had compromised immune systems? What about the threat of vapor buildup and possible explosion? We had 3 or 4 houses temporarily evacuated because of that phenomenon. And so it taught me a very valuable lesson, and that was how critical it was the government be able to respond, the government be there when you need it. And my community needed it. And the federal level failed us, the state level failed us. The only level of government that really made a difference and that responded to my community when it really needed it was the Fairfax County local government. Our elected officials and our appointed officials did a superb job of caring about the community and responding long-term for a long time. And that made all the difference, and it's certainly just embedded in my mind how important that is. And so if you'd asked me when I worked in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, would you ever run for local office, I would have laughed. That was just not in the cards. And yet my life took me on a different path because of that civic engagement. I then went on, as you know, to be the president of the Federation of Citizens Associations. I was the first president ever reelected in the 54-year history of the organization. And then in 1995 I ran for local government for the Providence Supervisor and have been on the board ever since.
One of the things that I tell people, because we've known each other a long time, one of the things I tell people is that when I view you, certainly you are a politician, an elected official, but deep down inside, when you spread everything apart, I view you as a policy wonk.
Yeah.
I mean, you relish policy, and sometimes you really surprise me with some of the things you come up with. And I'm not saying that just to blow some smoke at you. I've known you a long time. What do you think are the most important qualities an individual needs to have to run for Congress?
I think you do have to have roots in the community. I think you have to have the bona fides to say to the community, I now want to represent you in the United States Congress. I think you have to have some relevant experience with the issues that you're going to be dealing with in the Congress. And certainly as a local government official, we're intersecting with the federal government all the time. On transportation, on education, on the environment, on public safety, you name it. We are always dealing with the federal government. And in fact, I go up and lobby our congressional delegation several times a year on issues that matter to us, like the BRAC issue, the base realignment and closure issue, for example. A very important issue that the centrality of the federal government in that issue is key. I think you also have to have something to say about what are you going to do if you get to Congress in terms of addressing certain issues. And I think so experience, credentials, and a platform, if you will, I think are vitally important as people assess our job application for Congress.
It's an interesting phenomena. Often, while you're not the incumbent, you're well known as the chairman in Fairfax County. But I've seen now the list, and I've been to quite a few of them. You folks literally have had 16, 18 debates, and by the time you're done, you're going to have more than 20.
More than 30.
More than 30.
Yes.
Well,
unfortunately, however, not this one.
Yes.
And I share your regret. We had a debate format, as you know, that was going to be monitored by the League of Women Voters.
Correct.
There was going to be a Democratic moderator and a Republican moderator. Both sides had agreed to that debate, and inexplicably, my Republican opponent pulled out of that. And I think that's unfortunate for your viewers and for folks who might tune in on television. That was going to be the only televised debate, so that's a loss.
We did it with the 8th District, and ironically, the gentleman who was the Republican was doing work for the 8th District Republican candidate, but he was a professional, and we ran it professionally, and the league and the reporters and everyone else, and it ended up being a great thing. It's a shame that it didn't occur. I think it's his loss far more than yours. What have you been hearing on the campaign trail? I mean, you've been out and about. You're in Prince William County. You're in Fairfax County. You're in Fairfax City. What are you hearing from the voters?
Well, there's been a decided shift in what's on voters' minds. I think in the late summer, the energy, the price of oil, the price of gasoline was very much on voters' mind. Mm-hmm. I think that $4 a gallon threshold changed everything for everybody. And you heard a lot about that, and we were being asked certainly to address that issue. Obviously, with the meltdown on Wall Street and the subsequent events here in Washington, the attention has shifted overwhelmingly to the state of the economy and what does it mean for us as we move forward. Not only the package, the rescue package that was ultimately passed by the Congress and signed into law by the President, but also what does it mean to me in terms of my retirement account? What does it mean in terms of the posture of the federal government as we look to the future in its purchasing and procurement activities, because our economy here is inextricably linked to the presence of the federal government.
You've been hearing a lot of angst from people about their own investments, particularly where the whole workforce has moved away from defined benefits plans into 401ks, where they're much more self-directed and require a lot more participation by the worker. I know I've been hearing it from friends and the like. We are going to get into the issues in some depth as we go on, but let's stick with the economy for a couple more minutes. What is the sense of the people you're talking to relative to the economic bailout, economic rescue plan, whatever name that one wants to put on that, and how do you think that whole process is going at this point?
In the 11th Congressional District, you're dealing with a highly educated electorate. You're dealing with an electorate that is quite familiar with the federal government. Many of them federal workers are working for federal contractors. So I think there's some understanding of the fact that the rescue package was to address two big problems. One is an insolvency crisis of major institutions in the financial services industry. I mean, if you just look at that, we lost AIG in the insurance, the largest insurer in America in the insurance field. Wachovia Bank has been taken over. Washington Mutual Bank, the biggest bank failure in American history, occurred 3 weeks ago. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, two big presences right here in the metropolitan area. Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch. I mean, big names, some of them 158 years old, disappearing overnight. And a $700 billion package to try to to shore up those institutions to prevent a further meltdown. The second crisis we're dealing with simultaneously is a liquidity crisis. All of that has caused banking to freeze up credit. Credit to each other, to other banks, and credit to consumers. And I think we came very close to the brink of really an economic catastrophe in the United States with respect to liquidity. Individual consumers were at risk of losing their access to credit. That credit card might be swiped, but it wouldn't be any good. Not because your credit's bad, but there was no credit, no cash backing it up. So my electorate here gets that. They understand that that's what's going on. But the anxiety they're experiencing has to do with, obviously, the future. It's less a job security anxiety, which is palpable in other parts of the country, though there is some job insecurity. But it's more about my personal financial situation. What will it be like in a year? Will I be able to finance my kids' education in college? Will I have access to credit? Will my 401k have any value at all? And if it doesn't, and I'm getting closer and closer to retirement, what must I then do as I plot out the future?
One of the things that the other group that I think has been was in a lot of angst over this whole thing was small businesses. I mean, small businesses often need to borrow the money week to week to make their payroll.
Absolutely.
I mean, they pay it back the next week, but there's still a weekly float that they often use to make the payroll dealing with their bank, and even that float is disappearing for many of them.
That's right. And you know, you're already seeing ripple effects from this. Consumer confidence, of course, is going to be way down next time it's measured. We see it in sales tax revenue. Clearly, economic activity has slowed way down because sales tax revenues are way down. You talk to restaurateurs, their business is way off, and they're talking about having to lay off waiters and staff. You talk to car dealers, and there are a number of them that are going to go out of business because they simply can't access the credit, and they're stuck with a lot of vehicles that are no longer energy efficient and no longer desirable to consumers. And even if they were, consumers can't access the credit to purchase that automobile or that vehicle. So
well, they still have to pay on those cars that are sitting on their lots.
Exactly.
How long do you think it's going to take us to get out of this mess? I mean, first of all, what we've done has affected the entire world.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're seeing it in Europe. Europe's taking actions now. We've seen some real problems occurring everywhere from Iceland to England to Germany, and they've taken some actions. Are we in this for the long haul now? This isn't something that's a quick fix.
I think you have to sort of look at this in two parts. One is the immediate crisis has to be resolved and steady. You know, we've got to solve the banking problem. We've got to solve the liquidity problem. Both of those ought to be doable, not without pain, but they can be addressed. And so once we stabilize the existing situation over the next several months and hopefully calm down the markets, especially in Wall Street and global markets as well, then we have to address the longer term problem. Because clearly this didn't just happen by accident. There was lax oversight, and in some cases no oversight at all. You know, I'm struck by the fact that the Washington Post had a piece the other day that pointed out that John McCain's chief economic advisor, former Senator...
I want to get back, I want to talk about the oversight issue separately as soon as we go to the break. We're going to be breaking in a couple of minutes. I thank our viewers for watching. I want to remind you can reach us at 571-749-1166 and stay with us. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
They're loud.
I'm not hearing anything in here.
I know, I heard, I told him that. I'll deal with it.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me.
There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
May or may not
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call away. 1-800
Once again, George Burke with the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. My guest today is Fairfax County Board Chair Jerry Connolly, running for Congress in the 11th Congressional District here in Virginia. Jerry, before I so rudely interrupted you, we were continuing to talk about the economic meltdown that we have faced. So please, continue your thought.
I was talking to George about the lax oversight, and in some cases, utter lack of oversight of any kind at all, by the federal government these last 8 years. And let me give you one example. John McCain's chief economic advisor is former Texas Senator Phil Gramm, who called us a nation of wonders, you may recall, back in August, because of our concerns about the economy. When he was in the Senate, he got a provision he snuck into a bill that explicitly prohibited the federal government from any regulation or oversight of a financial instrument called credit debt swaps. Well, credit debt swaps are what are sinking some of these financial institutions today. Lehman Brothers alone has a $365 billion problem with that instrument alone. There is no federal regulation of the insurance industry. So AIG, not regulated by the federal government. There is no federal regulation of investment banking. So Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch in their investment houses weren't regulated by the federal government. So that has to be corrected.
The insurance companies are regulated at the state level very differently from state to state. There's
state.
no regulation anywhere on these investment banks.
That's right.
How do we correct that?
Well, I think we have to have a complete overhaul, frankly, of the federal role in regulating financial services industries. And I think it's got to be clear, predictable, transparent, and it's got to be very tough, so that consumer confidence is reinstilled in the system, because that's what's lacking right now. I think globally we're probably going to need some kind of new Bretton Woods agreement so that this kind of thing does not recur. I mean, we're talking right now about the nation of Iceland, in effect filing Chapter 11.
Of course, the nation of Iceland is about 3/4 of the size of population of Fairfax County.
Not even.
Not that it's not a sovereign nation.
That's right.
Look at it in terms of the numbers. One of the things I found interesting about your opponent and listening to John McCain or Sarah Palin is when you talk about the economy, when you talk about these issues, it's as if the last 8 years
hadn't happened.
I know. It's like, they tried to blame it on Clinton when Clinton left us with a budget surplus, and now we've got some of the highest deficits or the highest deficit and the highest national debt in the history of our country, I believe.
I have a friend who's a comic writer, a satirist named Jim Bourne, and he has a wonderful expression: if you're going to be a phony, at least be sincere about it. Here's a so-called conservative administration that told us that they were going to bring business principles to the management of the federal government. The first MBA ever to be in the White House, George W. Bush. A CEO of a major corporation, Hal Burton, Dick Cheney. They were going to run the government like a good business. Well, they took a surplus, a record federal surplus, and turned it into a record federal deficit. The largest deficit in American history this year. Doubling the national debt, driving up debt service to the second largest item in the federal budget now, over $430 billion a year. And of course now this economic meltdown. That's quite a record of financial management over the last 8 years. Why we would want to reward that by elevating someone of that ilk to the United States Congress would be beyond me, and I think beyond the voters.
I've been to a few of the debates, and it's interesting to listen to your opponent. That's his whole line. It sounds like he's talking 8 years ago.
Right.
Even when, I've heard, I want to get to another thing that's costing our economy money and also costing us American lives, and that's the war in Iraq.
Yeah.
And that's costing us, I don't know, in the range of $12 billion a month, as I understand it. But again, listening to whether it's John McCain or whether it's your opponent, it's as if it doesn't matter how it started. Now we just have to make sure we come out with victory. Well, I don't even know how you define victory in a war like this.
Well, and I also am puzzled how Senator McCain and others in defense of the current policy in Iraq cite the surge as a success. And they love to cite General Petraeus. We ought to listen to him. But there was another general, John Shinseki, who testified before Congress early on in this war saying, we don't have enough troops. We should have hundreds of thousands of troops if we really want to stabilize the situation and avoid insurgency and avoid civil war. What happened to General Shinseki? The Bush administration effectively fired him because they didn't like what he said. It was inconvenient. So 6 years later, to embrace the surge as if, well, see, we've succeeded all along like we intended, is really disingenuous. Clearly, we have to extricate ourselves from a combat role in Iraq. There has to be a phased timetable. The interesting thing is the same administration that accused those of us who favored such a withdrawal of being cut and run Democrats has now, in principle, agreed to the request of the Iraqi government for just such a timetable. So that issue, in a sense, ironically, is now off the table, having been agreed to by the United States government and the Iraqi government.
There is another trouble spot, though, where we are not doing what we need to be doing at this point, I think, and that is Afghanistan. What should we be doing in Afghanistan? I mean, we're devoting so many resources to Iraq, it seems we're giving it short shrift.
Ironically, an administration that says it's engaged in a war on terror and that had the whole world with us on 9/11 and 9/12 has essentially kicked away that support with a reckless invasion of Iraq that had nothing to do with the events of 9/11, according to the 9/11 Commission itself, the bipartisan commission, a presidentially appointed commission by this president. And we, as you suggest, aptly so, we've been profoundly distracted by the war in Iraq, and we've allowed the war we should have won in Afghanistan to slide. Now the Taliban is retrained, retooled, re-equipped, new manpower by being able to be trained and harbored in the western tribal areas of Pakistan. And they are re-infiltrating in Afghanistan. They now control large swaths of Afghanistan again, undoing the hard work the United States engaged in back right after the events of 9/11. That we cannot afford to lose Afghanistan. It was the Taliban that harbored al-Qaeda and allowed al-Qaeda to nurture that plot that culminated in the tragedy of 9/11.
I think one of the, not only is the terrorism growing in Afghanistan and the terrorists are getting stronger, but I think what's happened with what we have done in Iraq is we've created another generation of young men and women who feel that they've been wronged and may move in that direction. Given your experience on the Foreign Relations Committee and the like, are we going to be able to repair our stature around the rest of the world, repair our image?
I think we have a lot of hard work ahead of us, and I certainly want to, use the 25 years of foreign policy experience you referred to in the introduction to try to make some contribution to repairing that damage. We have to move from cowboy diplomacy and preemptive unilateralism of the Bush years to a policy of re-engagement with our allies and a willingness even to dialogue with our foes, as every administration, Republican or Democrat previous to this one, has done. We have to speak softly. Everyone knows we've got the big stick, and for a Republican president has proved very damaging to U.S. interests. So we have a lot of work to do. Am I confident we can do it? Yes. It's a big, complex world. The United States remains a superpower, the only superpower. The world needs our engagement, whether it be in North Korea, the Middle East, or the situation in the Persian Gulf. So we have no choice but to be engaged. But how we're engaged makes all the difference. We have of our foreign policy and our diplomacy. We helped create the United Nations. And for good or ill, it has served U.S. interests fairly well since its founding in 1945, 1946. Little wonder that when it needs the United Nations, it finds it wanting.
I would presume that the rest of the world is going to look at a McCain presidency as just an extension.
The president to forget that guidance of Teddy Roosevelt, and another superpower, the only superpower. The world needs our engagement. We also have to use the United Nations as an instrument. And this administration has trashed the United Nations, and then...
Which would be a major change, both in attitude, in party, and the like. Is that an accurate...
I think so. I think so, and I think the polls are increasingly showing...
...of a Bush presidency versus an Obama presidency.
...is that crowd needs to go. They've more than had their fair share in governing this country, in dominating Congress, dominating the White House, and they've brought us to this dominating Congress, dominating the White House, and they've brought us to this brink of economic collapse. They've brought us into disrepute in the international community, fighting two wars simultaneously. It's time for change. It's really time for a change from top to bottom, and I think the public mood is there.
We have about 2 minutes left, and during the course of the rest of this program, in the next half an hour, 2 minutes before the break, I'm going to want to, just to forewarn you, I'm going to want to see where you are on transportation, healthcare, education, specifically No Child Left Behind, the environment, and certainly maybe some of the social issues like embryonic stem cell research. Let's touch upon the environment. We got about a minute and a half, really about a minute. You've been endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters. You've been endorsed by the Sierra Club, and on the other side of the coin, you've been endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Realtors. I mean, it's really a broad-based coalition, police, firefighters in the middle, and the like. In terms of the environment, what drew them to you?
And by the way, I've also been endorsed by organized labor, AFL-CIO, and I'm very proud of that. You know, I don't think you can be a responsible elected leader and not be addressing the environment. One of our jobs is good environmental stewardship. Certainly here in Northern Virginia, we could have done better in the past. So when I became chairman, I laid out a 20-year plan for Fairfax County to rectify the problems of the past and even move beyond that. Let's reduce our carbon footprint. And so we're doing things like building LEED certified green buildings as we move forward, doubling our wind power as a source of alternative energy and renewable energy, switching to hybrid vehicles and alternative fueled vehicles in our fleet, while also reducing the size of the fleet. So there's a lot we're doing in the environmental front. And then I started Cool Counties to try to take that template nationally.
I want to get back to you a little bit more on global warming after the break. Keep watching. We'll be back in 2 minutes. You're watching Inside Scoop Virginia with George Burke and Jerry.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. Sam's. No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done.
D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right,
What are those? Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time!
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, you know. Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
Once again, George Burke with the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. My guest today is Fairfax County Board Chairman Jerry Connolly, running for Congress in the 11th Congressional District. We were talking about the environment, and you know, one of the things I've heard your opponent say several times is he's not sure that humans are the cause of global warming. I mean, I guess he still believes the Earth is flat.
This is a talking point in the Republican playbook this year. You heard the same words out of Sarah Palin in her debate with Senator Joe Biden. And it's a puzzling thing. I guess we're denying global warming while we're acknowledging something's going on, and I guess we have to do something. And I think it matters a lot that you acknowledge that global warming is a reality and that the key variable that's affecting the warming is human activity. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't acknowledge that, how do you then come up with a plan to modify human behavior so that we're no longer contributing to the problem, and indeed we're beginning to address the problem?
The other thing we hear the Republicans using repeatedly, and it's again right out of the playbook, is their argument about clean coal. Now, I've gone back and done some research. Not that we can totally eliminate coal from our equation at this point, but they are acting like everything in terms of scrubbing the noxious stuff out of coal is done. I don't think that's the case at this point.
You know, you can certainly use technology today to make a better coal-fired power plant. But to suggest that and drill baby drill everywhere, offshore, on shale deposits in the far west and so forth, well, what that does is significantly expand the carbon footprint. There is no such thing as a 100% carbon-free coal-fired power plant. In fact, many of those have to also sequester the carbon dioxide that's generated. So it may be an answer compared to dirty coal-fired power plants today, but it's not the long-term answer to our power problem, our energy problem. We've got to be looking at renewable energy resources that either have no carbon footprint or are profoundly reduced carbon footprint. And that's why solar is so important and wind power is so important. I think even nuclear may have to be back on the table and looked at again if we can make sure it's inherently safe and we can bring down the cost of nuclear power, because right now it's prohibitively expensive to build a new power plant. One of the reasons we haven't built one in 30 years.
And we still have the waste issue.
And we still have the waste issue.
Nobody can seem to decide
Correct.
Where they want to
put it. And given our heightened concern about terrorism, that's not a trivial issue.
As you know, I spent many years with the firefighters, and we actually did a survey at one point in terms of the disposal of the waste. And it was quite scary in terms of where this stuff had to go through to get there, and some of the fire departments along the route, particularly when you get out into the west, they really were almost non-existent.
That's right.
And that was a little scary. So some of that infrastructure, I think, has to be
It's not only where we ultimately store it, as you suggest, George, it's also the transport in getting there.
Correct.
You know, if you're transporting this dangerous radioactive material, however spent it may be, from the East Coast all the way to, say, Yucca Mountain in Nevada, that's a problem.
Yeah. We have a bit of surprise for you tonight. We have some new technology. We've only tried it once or twice. And Shannon Sullivan, who's one of our co-hosts here, is currently at the Sign of the Whale.
Great.
And I think she may have some people with her. She's gathered some questions. So instead of having me ask you questions, we're going to have some real voters' questions come to you. Shannon, Are you there? Oh, she's there. I can see her. I don't know whether she can see us.
Hi, this is Shannon Sullivan. I'm your remote host. I'm happily presenting this segment of the Inside Scoop from the Sign of the Whale restaurant in Falls Church. I've spent the afternoon talking to some of the bar and restaurant patrons here about the climate of today's campaigns, especially the economy and their concerns.
You're in trouble then. We may have lost her. Well, she'll have to, she's stopped. We can look at her image there. Let's move on, and if we get the technical difficulties fixed, we'll go back to her. Let's talk about transportation a bit. It is one of the hottest issues and has been an issue for some time in Northern Virginia. Some people say pave, pave, pave.
It was a topmost concern for people.
All right, we're not going to worry about it. How do we, we know what you have done as chairman, although I'd like you to reiterate some of this stuff, but I want you to go on and tell us in terms of what would you do in office as a member of Congress?
Well, just on the local front, we've been doing a lot. We've been, I've been a great advocate for rail to Dulles, which I think is the single most important transportation Northern Virginia can make, transforming a 23-mile corridor that includes Tysons, Reston, Herndon, Route 28 corridor, and the airport itself. Over and above that, of course, we finished the Springfield Mixing Bowl on time and under budget. We've got a new Woodrow Wilson Bridge with lots of exchanges and interchanges leading up to it on both the Maryland and Virginia side that's going to transform the southern part of the county. We've widened 123. We're building 10 interchanges, 7 of which are now completed on Route 28, making a huge difference in that corridor. We've widened West Ox all the way from the Government Center to Reston and Herndon. So there are a lot of investments we're making. I came up with a $100 million plan for sort of more bite-sized transportation improvements. We completed that first 4-year plan, and we adopted the second 4-year plan to do the same thing again. And we put 2 bond referendums, transportation bond referendums, on the ballot in my first term as chairman. So we've done a lot in transportation. Unfortunately, Richmond has not done its share. With respect to the federal government, though, who represents? We are reauthorizing what's called Safety Lou, the Transportation Authorization Act of the federal government. That's where the federal funding for transportation is going to lie for the next 5 or 6 year period. So it is critical that Northern Virginia be represented in that process by somebody who understands transportation, has been involved in transportation, and can get in there and make sure that we protect our interest and that Northern Virginia gets its fair share. I also think that we have to try to rebalance between roads and bridges, which God knoweth we need additional capacity, and we're doing that on the Beltway with hot lanes right now. But we also need more investment in transit. I want to eventually see transit in the I-66 corridor. I want to see transit going to Potomac Mills. In the seat is very important in terms of transportation. Next year, in the I-95 corridor in Prince William County, eventually we'd like to see circumferential rail along the Beltway, and we have allowed for that on the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. We also need light rail on many, many corridors, and Fairfax and Arlington have reached an agreement for light rail in the Columbia Pike corridor, but there are lots of others as well. We have to expand bus rapid transit. We've done that on the Richmond Highway corridor, but now with BRAC coming to fulfillment, we need a lot more of that. So transportation's key, and next year is going to be a pivotal year in Congress with respect to transportation for Northern Virginia.
Fighting to bring that money into Northern Virginia. Healthcare is another issue that I know is on the minds of a lot of people in the 11th District. Our voters and residents are probably a little better off than many, because many of them work for large companies and consulting groups or the federal government, where they have access at a generally reasonable price to healthcare. But there are many who are the children of people who have this health care who've now turned 20, or out of college and they've turned 23, or they're 25 years old, or they're working for small businesses that themselves can't afford health care. How do we solve this problem? I mean, do we go to full nationalized health care? Do we just leave it, as it seems your opponent and John McCain want, leave it in the hands of the private sector? Where do we go to solve this?
Well, my opponent, his answer is private health savings accounts. And he literally has said, I don't want to, as an employer, I don't want to be paying for an employee who just has the sniffles. And I think that says it all about that Darwinian view of our role in healthcare, making sure that there's universal access for affordable healthcare. I think that's the goal. I divide this into 2 things. What can we do right away to improve the current healthcare system, and what must we do to transform that system to get to universal access and affordable healthcare? In the first 100 days, I'd love to see Congress overturn the effective Bush veto of the SCHIP program for kids. I think it's tragic that millions of kids are uninsured. We have an opportunity in Congress to address that issue. It did pass the Congress with bipartisan majorities, but not enough to overcome a presidential veto.
And that would have added several, I think 6 million children to the health insurance rolls.
Absolutely would have. We got 46 million people uninsured in the United States, about 8 million or so children. And so that would have taken a big chunk out of that. I want to prevent insurance companies from cherry picking if you have a previously existing medical condition. I think that's outrageous. The whole point of having a risk pool is to have a risk pool. You cover risk, not eliminate risk. I want to go to electronic record keeping, which could wring out $19 billion of cost in the current healthcare system. I want to allow Medicare to negotiate the price of pharmaceuticals. The Republican Congress, when it provided the drug benefit, explicitly prevented Medicare from negotiating the price of drugs because the big pharmaceutical companies got in there and lobbied them successfully. Ironically, the Veterans Administration in the same federal government is allowed to negotiate the price of drugs. That could bring down the cost of health care by $90 billion a year. So there are things we can do immediately that could affect and improve the quality of health care currently. I then want to look at, what's working around the country. There's a lot going on at the state level that commends itself to the federal government without nationalizing health care, without interfering with a consumer and his or her private physician. Massachusetts, for example, has a mandatory insurance coverage policy. It was signed into law by a Republican governor and a Democratic state legislature. And what has happened in 3 years since that law has been in the books? Massachusetts has cut the uninsured rolls by 2/3, George. That's 2/3, and brought down emergency room healthcare costs significantly.
That's incredible. And it was, as you said, a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature.
Yep.
Let's go right on to education. And obviously one of the things that has been debated for the last several years, particularly at the local level, is the whole point of No Child Left Behind.
Right.
And the impact it has on local school systems. And of course, Fairfax has, I don't know, I think it's the 10th, 11th, or 12th largest school system in the nation. It's huge.
That's right.
How do you cope with it? How do you deal with it? How do you resolve some of the problems?
No Child Left Behind, strikes one as, federal good intentions gone awry. I think the goals are noble and are worthy of pursuit. But there are several aspects of No Child Left Behind that are seriously flawed, and it makes you wonder if the people who wrote the bill ever had to run a school system, let alone a large and diverse school system such as ours and that of Prince William County. Number one, it's an unfunded mandate. No Child Left Behind costs taxpayers locally here $17 million a year, and in Prince William County probably another $4 or $5 million. That's the equivalent almost of 1 penny in the tax rate. That's outrageous. I mean, if the federal government thinks an idea is worth doing, the federal government ought to pay for it, not put the burden on local taxpayers. Secondly, it doesn't really take into account big, diverse school systems. Fairfax County has 170,000 kids, 50% of whom are minority kids, at least 25% of whom are foreign-born. We speak well over 100 languages in the school system, and that means we don't have a level playing field in terms of English proficiency. We do know that if you're in a Fairfax County school, we can get you to close to a level playing field within 2 years. But we need 2 years, not 1, and not instant. And Margaret Spellings, in the Bush administration, the Secretary of Education, has simply refused to acknowledge that and has refused to grant us, some flexibility in being able to implement those provisions of No Child Left Behind. And thirdly, No Child Left Behind is flawed in that it creates subgroups for achievement. So you could theoretically have a high school where 2,450 kids are meeting all the goals set by No Child Left Behind, but one group of 50 kids, 26 of whom are not, 24 of whom are, and you have a failing high school.
We're going to take a break, and my guest is Jerry Connolly, and he's running for Congress in the 11th Congressional District. We shall be back in 2 minutes. We got plenty of ground to cover. I wish we had 2 hours instead of 1.
I'll come back.
So stay tuned if you will.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
Once again, George Burke with the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. My guest today is Jerry Connolly, Democratic candidate for Congress in the 11th Congressional District of Virginia. Jerry, it's great having you. We were talking about education, and despite all the problems of No Child Left Behind, despite the fact that we have such a diverse school population. I know my children went to the school that National Geographic called the most diverse high school in the nation. We have an excellent school system overall.
Yes.
Describe it. I mean, it's won awards, you know, I mean, there's all sorts of...
No system is perfect, but most of the other large school systems in the United States are poor performing, in some cases failing school systems. Not so in Fairfax County or Prince William County. Take Fairfax. Of the 50 largest jurisdictions in the United States, we rank #1 in high school graduation rate. The percentage of our kids who start and graduate the highest in the United States. And of those kids, 94% go into higher education. Among the highest in the country, the national average is 65%.
We are going to try and see if we can get overcome these technical difficulties. And we have Shannon Sullivan at the Sign of the Whale. And I think Alec Kohut, who owns the Whale, is there as well. So let's see whether we can get through to her this time.
Set the bottles to the floor.
There she is. Take the beer bottles off there, gang. See if we can see him.
Better. Did I ever tell you about that college girl from New America?
We're watching an
interview with folks. The one that's talking to her.
Hello, Shannon and Alec.
There's about a 6 or 7 minute delay, which is part of the problem.
This is Shannon, your remote host. We're coming to you from the Sign of the Whale in Falls Church, where I've been spending the afternoon talking to our restaurant and bar patrons about the state of the economy and especially the current campaign, both federally for president and for U.S. Congress, where we have in our studio Jerry Connolly for the 11th Congressional District. We have a whole bunch of questions. The first one I wanted to put to you is from Shirley and Burke, who wanted to know, are you for or against stem cell research and why? But before we go right to that question, because I want to make sure I got that on the air, I do have with me Alex, who is our Sign of the Whale bar owner, and he hears a lot from our Joe Six-Pack. And I want to get the inside scoop as to what's really going on in the economy and their interpretations of the political campaign.
Thank you, Shannon.
Certainly.
Just got back from my hockey game. That's why I look like I do. I played hockey today.
That's right. I'm supposed to give the introduction, and I don't believe his mom, Ruth, was there to see him either, and he's very disappointed.
But definitely, we hear a lot here. This is where people come after work to unwind. This is a common man's bar. This is your everyday Joe Six-Pack, as some people would like to say.
I know.
All right, well, we know we got Joe Sixpack. Shirley from Burke wanted to know your position on stem cell research, for or against, specifically embryonic stem cells.
Well, let me just thank Shannon and Alec from Side of the Whale for what they're doing today and testing sort of voter attitudes about the economy. On embryonic stem cell research, I favor embryonic stem cell research. As you may recall, in the year 2001, the first major decision President Bush made, domestic policy decision, was to prevent lines of embryonic stem cells from being used in research, breakthrough research, medical research, that could have made a big difference in advances against chronic diseases like lupus, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, MS. I just heard a report today, for example, about extraordinary advances in turning around the effects of lupus, including brain effects, through the use of embryonic stem cell research. So I think it has enormous promise. I am stunned that my Republican opponent has said it has zero promise at all and is sort of to be cast away on the side as an issue. We've lost 7 critical years of medical research, and George, as you know about research today, you know, a year is an eternity.
Sure is.
When it comes to research. 7 years is quite an eternity. So we need to allow that to go forward to save lives. I can't think of something that's a more pro-life position, frankly, than allowing research to go forward to try to help the human condition and turn lives around.
You know, I thought it was interesting listening to your opponent in some of the debates. He also opposes abortion of any kind, even when the health of the mother is at stake, which I find to be a very extreme position. Can you give our viewers and me a sense of where you stand on the whole choice issue?
You know, I think that is an extreme position. Even some very strong opponents of choice in the Congress recognize the need for exemptions in the case of rape or incest or the health of the mother. To not allow for those exemptions is essentially to criminalize activity.
Correct.
And that would criminalize the activity of both the doctor performing the procedure and the woman electing to have such a procedure. And I think that would be tragic for the United States and an enormous regression in terms of law and in terms of really equality for women. I will not support any legislation or any attempt to recriminalize a woman's right to control her own body.
Excellent. You've already received, and we talked about them briefly, but you just received an endorsement the other day from the South County Chronicle, and quite frankly, my guess is you're going to get an awful lot of endorsements coming in the next couple of weeks, just as you have received repeatedly in the past for your performance as chairman and prior to that as supervisor from Providence District. If you can just give us a quick feel in about a minute or so as to some of the groups that have endorsed your candidacy.
Well, you cited a lot of them. We're very proud of the fact that virtually every environmental group that endorses in federal races has endorsed my candidacy. Lots of business and professional groups have endorsed my candidacy. Most of the business community has endorsed my candidacy, the Washington Board of Trade, the Chamber of Commerce, all the public safety groups, the police, the firefighters, the sheriff's deputies have endorsed my candidacy. Just going down the, of course, organized labor has been a great advocate.
And when you talk about organized labor, you're talking about firefighters, you're talking about police, you're talking about electrical workers.
That's right.
You're talking about the people who build the roads, you're talking about the people who fix you and build your homes, you're talking about the people who protect us.
That's right.
I mean, it's a broad coalition.
It's a broad coalition, and I have run every one of my races that way. I have always tried to put together a broad coalition of support to try, and the reason I do that is so that when we're looking for solutions, we're trying to find common ground. And I've been successful at doing that as chairman of Fairfax County, I believe, and as a member of the board before that, and I've been successful at doing that regionally. I'm proud of also my regional involvement here, which I think is an important credential. I've been the chairman of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, representing 19 jurisdictions in Metropolitan Washington, the national capital region. I've been the president of the Virginia Association of Counties, representing all 95 counties in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You don't get to those positions without being able to merit bipartisan support, rural, urban, suburban. And I think that's the hallmark of how I have approached governance, and it's how I hope to approach Congress. We have to tone down the partisanship. We have to be focused on results, and that's what I want to do in the United States Congress.
You just answered the question I was going to ask you about working across the aisle, because you do have a reputation of doing that. One of the things I like to do on this show, when I have a candidate on, is give them a couple of minutes to talk directly to the voters. And, you know, I'll give you a good 2 minutes. Tell our voters why they should choose you on November 4th. And by the way, you can vote absentee now.
That's right.
But why they should choose you as our next congressman to replace Tom Davis.
For the first time in 14 years, the 11th Congressional District of Virginia is an open seat. That means we have no incumbent. It is critical that the person who succeeds Congressman Tom Davis have the capacity and the credentials to represent us ably in the United States Congress. You know, you're competing with 434 other members of Congress, 434 other districts all across the country. It's just critical that the person we elect have extensive local government experience, have extensive experience in the federal government, understand and command of the issues, and I think I'm that person. I've spent 14 years with a passion for delivering effective government here in Northern Virginia, and I want to bring that same passion to the federal government. While we expect our local government to work when we need it, and it does, and we've won all kinds of plaudits for that. Proud of the fact that Fairfax County was named the best managed county of 3,000 counties in the United States. I'm proud of the fact that we're one of only a handful of jurisdictions with a AAA bond rating, saving our taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars since we've had that AAA bond rating. I want to bring that same expectation of excellence and of performance to the federal government. In the last 8 years, we've seen a federal government that frankly is dysfunctional. Whether it be the Environmental Protection Agency, when we don't like the science, we doctor the results, or a Federal Emergency Management Agency that simply can't get its act together to respond to one of the worst natural catastrophes to hit continental United States, namely Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. The federal government just doesn't work very well. I also want to bring my foreign policy background to try to help repair the damage done in the Bush years to U.S. standing overseas and to end a war in Iraq and bring our boys and girls home. So there's a lot of work to do, and I believe that I've got the credentials and the experience to do that work and represent us well here in the 11th Congressional District. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. You know, I've known you a long time. I think it's about 25 years. And I have to say that I personally believe you're eminently qualified to take this job. And I think you will represent us ably, and represent us intelligently, and represent us from a position in the middle. So that's our show tonight, folks. And I'm going to come right out and suggest that I urge you to vote for Jerry Connolly on November 4th for Congress in the 11th Congressional District. I thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.